All right, let's dive into a really fascinating period in South and Southeast Asia. We're talking about a time when your faith, well, it wasn't just a private thing. It was deeply tied to who was in charge, how entire empires were forged, and, yeah, how people pushed back.
And that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. I mean, think about it. How does something as personal as what you believe become a blueprint for building an empire? Or flip that around, how does it become the very thing that challenges one? We're going to see just how powerful belief was on the public stage, shaping kingdoms and sparking major resistance.
Okay, so to really get a grip on this period, we've got to get to know the key players. And our whole story really boils down to the interactions between three major faiths playing out across two very distinct regions. So first up, in South Asia, you've got Hinduism. And it's so much more than just a set of beliefs. It's the bedrock of society. It has this built-in social structure, the caste system, which is pretty rigid. The whole idea is that your place in society is basically decided by what you did in a past life, reincarnation.
So let's paint a picture of what things look like around the year 1200. In India, Hinduism is the big one. It's deeply, deeply entrenched. Meanwhile, you have Buddhism, which is what's called a universalizing faith, meaning it's for everyone, everywhere, and it's spreading like wildfire across Asia. And then, a totally new player enters the game from the Northwest, Islam. And it brings not just a new religion, but a whole new way of thinking about political power.
But here's the thing you've got to remember. None of these religions were static. They weren't just sitting there unchanging. Actually, one of the most interesting parts of this story is how they were all changing from within. People were looking for, a more direct, more personal connection to their faith. Take Hinduism, for example. This internal change sparked something called the Bhakti movement, and the core idea was honestly revolutionary for the time. It said that you personally, could have a direct relationship with the deity, and it didn't matter what your caste was. This was a huge deal. It wasn't just a different way to pray, it was a direct challenge to the entire social structure.
And what's so wild is that something very similar was happening in Islam at the same time, with the rise of Sufism. Sufis were all about that personal, mystical connection to God, rather than just following strict rules. So in both of these massive religions, you see this incredible shift happening from the ground up. A move towards a more personal, emotional faith, and away from those really rigid, top-down hierarchies.
Okay, so with that background, let's zoom in on our first region, South Asia. The story here is really one of collision. It's about what happens when a powerful new force slams into a culture that's been there for centuries.
The game completely changes in 1206. That's when Turkic invaders from the northwest arrive and set up the Delhi Sultanate. And just like that, boom, Islam goes from being one of the faiths in the region to being the religion of the rulers in northern India.
But as you can imagine, it's one thing to take over politically. It's another thing entirely to change the hearts and minds of millions of people. This sets up a huge conflict. You've got the Muslim-led Delhi Sultanate in the north, ruling over a mostly Hindu population. And what happens? Down in the south, a massive Hindu empire, the Vijayanagara, rises up for the specific purpose of stopping them. And the origin story of the Vijayanagara Empire is, you just can't make this stuff up. So the Delhi Sultanate sends two brothers south to expand their territory. These two brothers had actually converted to Islam. But then, in this unbelievable twist, as soon as they get down south, they renounce Islam, go back to being Hindu, and found their own empire with the sole mission of resisting the very people who sent them there in the first place. I mean, if you ever need an example of the power of cultural and religious identity, that's it. All right, now let's hop over to Southeast Asia, because the vibe here is completely different. Instead of that story of clash and resistance, what you see here is more like a colorful mosaic. You have all these different states, and they're all using religion and trade in really creative ways to get ahead. So if you were a ruler here, you had a fundamental choice to make. Where does my power come from? Is it the sea or is it the land? Am I going to get rich by controlling the shipping lanes and ports, these super important maritime trade routes, or am I going to base my power on controlling farmland and making sure everyone gets fed? And this really gives you a great snapshot of the major players. You had sea-based empires like Srivijaya and later Majapahit. These guys got super wealthy by controlling the sea trade, basically acting as the toll booths for all the goods flowing between India and China. And because of all that trade, they became these melting pots of culture, blending Hindu and Buddhist ideas that came in on merchant ships. Then you had the land-based powers like the Khmer Empire. Their strength came from agriculture, from controlling massive rice fields. And as we're about to see, their religious identity was pretty fluid too.
You know, there's one place on Earth where you can literally see this blending of faiths, this layering of beliefs, and it is absolutely spectacular.
I'm talking about Angkor Wat. This place started its life as a gigantic Hindu temple, built for the god Vishnu. But later on, the rulers of the Khmer Empire switched to Buddhism, and instead of tearing the old temple down, they just added to it. They put in Buddhist statues and new carvings. It's this incredible mashup. The technical term for this kind of blending is syncretism, and at Angkor Wat, you can see it literally carved into the stone.
So, when we pull back and look at these two regions, what's the big picture? What are the main takeaways?
Well, we've really seen two totally different approaches, right? In South Asia, religion became a rallying cry, a symbol of identity and resistance to foreign rule. But in Southeast Asia, it was more like a flexible tool in the ruler's toolkit, something to be adapted and blended to secure trade and power. But here's the bottom line for both. Religion and politics were not separate things. Not at all. Faith was an absolutely essential tool for running a state, for getting people on your side, and for justifying your right to rule.
And that kind of leaves us with one final thought to chew on. The next time you see something in the news about religious politics in India, or about the unique cultural blend in a place like Thailand or Cambodia, I want you to think back to this period. How many of the conflicts, the alliances, and the identities we see today have roots that go all the way back, 800 years, to these stories of faith and power? Because as we've just seen, this history, it's not really history. It's still very much alive.